good to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hockey Time Machine. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. Let me tell you the list of Canadians who have been nominated in all of these categories: television's Gemini Awards, film's Genie Awards, music's Juno Awards, and Canada's National Book Awards. Ready? Here's the list. Dave Bidini. That's the list. Dave Bidini. And so we welcome to Hockey Time Machine the one and only Canadian who's been on all four of those lists. Hi, Dave. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
You failed to mention that I didn't win any of those awards. I was merely nominated. So that's not quite as big an achievement as it may seem. But thank you, and thank you for keeping that an introduction short, because they're horribly embarrassing when you have people talk too much about you. But it's thrilled. Listen, I've been wanting to come on this show literally for years, and I'm so glad I finally got a chance to make it happen.
The failure to win, I could only chalk up to insane jealousy on the part of your colleagues.
That's right. Yeah, Russian judges or corrupt judges or French judges or whatever it is. Yeah.
The fix was in.
Exactly.
You were part of a murderer's row of esteemed filmmakers who produced the marvelous Summit 72 documentary, 4 one-hour shows that are currently in the middle of airing in Canada on CBC. Your piece of the puzzle was episode 3 of the 4, covering games 5, 6, and 7, as well as the exhibitions in Sweden, 5, 6, and 7 of the Summit series. What was your approach going into trying to tell that piece of the story?
I mean, I'd made The Hockey Nomad Goes to Russia in 2005. So I sort of, and I've actually toured in Russia too, musically. So I felt I knew the country, fairly well. We made 3 trips there, myself and Mike Downey, when we were making Hockey Nomad Goes to Russia. So, when it came time for the team to get into Russia and the series to move there, it seemed natural that I would field that part of the narrative. I mean, and I must say too, over the course of the 4 episodes, while we are individually responsible for one episode, I had a lot of creative input across the board too. So I would have leaned on those guys for ideas and guidance, and they would have leaned on me, vice versa. So it really was a team filmmaking effort, which also came with its own complications. But I wanted to. It's a lot of. I mean, it's 4 games, right? Including the Swedish games. Actually, there were 2 games in Stockholm. But so it's a lot of games to fit into that, 48 minutes. But I also wanted to make sure that it breathed when it came to, the cultural nature of the, of the piece, the social nature. I wanted to make room for music and humor, all the while being able to tell the story of what actually happened in game. That was the big challenge.
Let's talk about the music for a second, because if I'm correct, you were also responsible for the music in the series, original music. How do you go about doing that?
I think it's a little bit like everything that I try to do. I just try to find the new angle, I guess. I try to find the new, the new entry point. In terms of the creativity, and I think if you can find that new entry point creatively, the work has a better chance of standing singularly and distancing itself from all the work that came before it and surround it. We just tried to make different choices when it came to the music. Beginning, at its very essence, the foundation, musical foundation of the series is Hugh Marsh, master violin player, collaborator with everybody from Bruce Cockburn to Prince to Robert Palmer to Iggy Pop and the Stooges, Dionne Warwick, Rod Stewart. It goes on and on and on. He's also a bandmate of mine, but a legendary Canadian creative force, and not a typical choice when it came to the score, but an incredible. I mean, another thing that people don't know about Hugh is an amazing, incredible sports fan. I didn't even know about that until I started to play in a band with him. But and he also has the foremost collection of Negro League baseballs outside of the Negro League Museum in St. Louis, and befriended actually a lot of those players in their later days, including Leon Day and other legends. But we got Hugh to lay the foundation musically for the score, and then I'll give you one example. In 1970, in Game 1 in the Montreal Forum, Russia scores 3 unanswered goals, I think it is, in the third period. It becomes obvious after the Canadians make it 4-3. It becomes obvious in those last 5 minutes or so that the Russians are going to win this game, and this wave has overtaken us from a hockey perspective in Canada, the Soviet wave. And we wanted to show those 3 goals in a way that wouldn't merely be following the puck, right? We wanted to kind of take a very meditative, kind of a languid, funereal view of what happened in that hot moment when the Russians seized what we had thought was ours. So I immediately went looking through Leonard Cohen's catalog initially, and I think the secret of good musical supervision and music programming is finding a track, a deep album track by a known voice or a known musician. And I found a song called "The Traitor" from Recent Songs, which is a middle period Leonard Cohen song. It has strings, it's very classic Leonard Cohen, and we laid it in over slowed down, very kind of painterly images of the Soviet skating, focusing on an ankle, focusing on a blade, focusing on the way a body tilted, moving across the ice, which the Russians did with such distinction. The way they moved was so new to us. They didn't move like the kind of hockey players that we knew, and it was a different kind of ballet. So found this song, tried to get it cleared through the Cohen estate. They said no. And so I had to do a bit of work. So I kind of backdoored it a little bit, asked actually on Twitter for a contact for Adam Cohen, Leonard's son, to appeal to him personally. Didn't get that, but I got a message from Jake Gould, who former manager of the Tragically Hip and Gord Downey's longtime manager. He sent me an email of a guy named Merk Merkiadis, who runs Hypnosis Songs, who has the Leonard Cohen catalog. And when I sent him the clip and appealed to him for use of the song, he told me that his Greek grandmother had thrown a slipper at the screen that night when she heard the Soviet national anthem being played. So we got the song. So and we got a great story too. So that's just part of the process of what we tried to do when we were doing that.
I'm going a little far afield, but is the goal with documentary music to kind of enhance and help tell the story without the viewers really knowing that it's there?
I think it's a bit of everything, honestly, because, we didn't try to lead the viewer emotionally, but I think there are times when you can, and you can do that effectively. No, for us, it was more about, you're watching this narrative, which is hopefully appealing to you, and the music just should add another creative element on top of it. It should deepen and enrich the kind of the visual experience. So it should be moving creatively as the visuals are moving creatively. Just be a strong creative companion to it. So yeah, and I think I had an advantage, honestly, by not having done a ton of this before. Although Rio Statics in 1994 composed all of the original music for Whale Music, which was a film starring Maury Chaykin, which opened the 1994 Canadian Toronto International Film Festival. So I'd done that before. I'd worked with music and pictures a little bit before, and I think maybe bringing that kind of cinematic sensibility to a hockey series, to televised television hockey series was something that maybe set it apart from the usual kind of timpani and strings that you hear in a lot of sports docs.
Specifically talking about your episode, it was striking to me that the focus wasn't entirely on the ice, but also the impact of the 3,000 or so Canadian fans who travel to Moscow. Here's Team Canada goalie Ken Dryden talking about that.
My most powerful memories of Moscow are the Canadian fans. I mean, that again, I mean, the whole context of it is that this is 1972. Canadians in 1972, they didn't go to Europe much, and you didn't go behind the Iron Curtain. And it was something about Canada and something about hockey that made them know they needed to be there.
The fans were part of the Summit Series story, weren't they?
They were. They were a force in that series. 3,000 of them in Luzhniki, and it was a wonder to the players, and I also think it was a wonder to us as viewers. And remember, in '72, I mean, Ken mentions that Canadians didn't go to Europe. It's true. I went to Florida, basically, or Myrtle Beach, but going behind the Iron Curtain, willingly going behind the Iron Curtain was that was just not something that was done, and it was remarkable that many people were that curious about Russia, felt that they would be safe enough. That's another thing too, in terms of the Soviet regime, and we knew that there were gulags, and we started to know about dissident culture in the early 1970s. And there had to have been, I think, in general, a certain fear, worry, that couldn't have been that far away from people who went there to watch that series. Not to say that the Canadians fans necessarily put them in the way of danger, but it's not unfathomable just to suggest that they were risking something, I think. So astonishing. I'm proud of episode 3 because, Kenny doesn't quite cry there. He holds himself back, but Peter Mahav, earlier in that episode, it really affects him, and he cries on screen. And anyways, seeing that showed you how truly moved he was by the Canadian fans' presence there.
As a documentarian who's been neck deep in getting this program to air, so it just aired. What's it like for you to then watch it on television just like everybody else?
It's pretty neat. I mean, I know from music, getting letters and meeting fans who tell me about hearing our music, in a fishing shack on the Avalon, on the tip of the Arctic Ocean in Tuktoyaktuk and Haida Gwaii, right across the country, the deepest prairies. So I kind of know that that's a thing. And that was part of what I was thinking about last night too, that, this is still a broadcaster that transmits deeper into Canada's veins than most. And, in the city, we tend to get a little bit disaffected when we think about the national broadcaster and what it really means. But once you get out of the cities, you see, 6 o'clock is still the news, and 11 o'clock is, Saturday nights are still Saturday nights, and people, are still, turn to the CBC for their stories. So that was kind of great to think about, what we'd been doing in an editing suite for months was going to be broadcast to all the towns, and we know through Canadian hockey how important hockey towns are to the game. And I'm thrilled to think of, who might have been, viewing last night.
As a journalist, you've written previously about the Summit Series. As we sit here today, 50 years on, have your reflections on the series changed in any way?
Interesting. I mean, I think I know the series really well. I just made it my once I started to rediscover, and Paul Patsku, we can talk about him for a sec, just in terms of, 25 years ago, if you wanted to see tapes of old games, well, all roads pretty much led through Paul, but there were, I remember being in the archives, and looking at tapes of those games. This is before the DVDs were out, before YouTube, obviously. So I did those deep dives on those games, and I reread all the books that I'd read as a kid. Talked to a bunch of the players. When we made Hockey Nomad too, we learned a lot about 72 just before going over there. Hockey Nomad goes to Russia, because part of the that journey was to learn about Russian hockey through the prism, or post 72. So I can't say I necessarily learned new things about the series. One thing that Harry Sinden told, I guess tactically, strategically, I did learn a bunch of stuff. Harry, and we couldn't find room for it in our episode, but Harry mentioned Game 8, the third period of Game 8. The Canadian team is behind 5-3. And he instructed his players to start the game as if they were ahead 5-3 rather than down 5-3. And his reasoning for that was he wanted to protect the deficit, as it were. He knew that if the Russians scored the sixth goal, they'd be dead. There would be no way the Canadians would come back. So he wanted them to play defensively. And I think in part to probably lull a sense of self-confidence in the Russians, and then really go for it in the last 10 minutes. He said it was such a gift to get that fourth goal within the first 10 minutes, because it made it even easier to play those last 10 minutes. But I thought that was really interesting. And last night in our episode, Dale Talon talks about one of the things Harry told them was wingers anyways were to not man the points in the defensive zone, but to play in between and deeper, to concentrate more on the corners and not worry so much about the Russian defensemen. He mentioned too that the Russian defensemen didn't have great shots, but they actually scored a lot on the slap shot. So I don't know if that tells you about the Canadian goaltending or whatever, but it was interesting to kind of learn and get the inside track tactically, to learn about what they did to win that series.
Before you were a sports journalist, Dave, is this true? You pretended to be a sports journalist?
It is true. I'm not you're selling all journalists short by calling me a journalist. I'm not a journalist by any stretch of the imagination. Journalism is hard. I write books. It's a different thing. But yeah, we did in 1987. Is that right? Yes. 1987, me, Gord Cumming, and Pete Hadis, we just two friends of mine, we clipped stories from the Hockey News. I had a friend who worked at a college newspaper, and we fabricated bylines and laid them over stories from the Hockey News and the Etobicoke Guardian, and sent off this press pack to Marcel Aubu and his organizing committee at Rendezvous 87, and told them that we were sports writers from Toronto, and we wanted to come to Rendezvous and cover the event. I heard nothing until literally 2 days before. I got a call early one morning by a woman named Chantal, said she was calling from Quebec City, and she'd got our application and our credentials would be ready for us. in the lobby of the Hilton, and so called Pete. Pete called Gord, and we got on the train, and we went to Quebec. Showed up at the Hall of Fame first because we had nowhere to stay. So we had a friend, James Duplessis, who worked for the Hall of Fame. And Jimmy said we could maybe stay with him, but we couldn't find Jimmy. So we ended up flagging a car with the Rendezvous logo on the side. The driver was charming, and I took pity on us, I think, and said, I'll take you to the hotel. Went to the hotel, went to the front desk, told them who we were. And they said that there was only one room left in the hotel, and it was not the presidential suite, but it was a suite. And would that be okay? And we were like, yes, that will be fine. So we stayed in this beautiful hotel room, and really, we infiltrated the legit sort of hockey world for 2.5 days. And you mentioned Mark Messier's unit. That's where I saw it. In that dressing room, but I got to meet Gordie Howe and Stan Mikita, Tony Esposito, and also a lot of the media whom I really respected as well, all the writers. But yeah, we had pretended to be hockey journalists for 2.5 days in 1987 in Quebec City, and and so that was my start basically.
All right, if you're not a sports journalist, here's how you have described yourself non-musically, as a, quote, hockey literary fetishist. What does that mean?
Well, I think it means that I tried to, because I loved modern art and contemporary fiction and alternative music at the time. I wanted to apply that kind of aesthetic or that kind of my artistic mindset to hockey, because I think a lot of hockey writing. I mean, this is not to disparage the madmen of hockey and the great books by Trent Frayne and Jack Ludwig because those were great in their own way, but they did generally kind of stick to a lane, right? So the idea was to kind of get in there and populate that lane with different ideas that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And I'm still doing to this day. I think I tried to apply it, in this series as well, just by making different kind of choices. So I think that's where the literary kind of nature. Because another thing to remember too is Thomas Boswell and Roger Angell knew baseball writing was really important in the 1970s. There was new soccer writing, right, through Roddy Doyle and Nick Hornby. There had never really been that with hockey, so the idea was to kind of create something like that in terms of approaching hockey storytelling a certain way.
As part of your extensive travels, and you mentioned it earlier, The Hockey Nomad, you wrote a bestseller called Tropic of Hockey, and that later became the documentary, The Hockey Nomad. We're going to show a clip of that now.
In a way, hockey all over the world kind of feels the same everywhere, except the faces and the players and the style's different, and the rinks are different. But at the end of the day, right, it's a stick and a puck and people playing a game that they love to play.
Whether it's under the TV lamps of 20,000-seat arenas in big North American cities, or by the light of the falling sun on this rink just north of the Gobi Desert, really we're all the same hockey player in love with the same damn game.
That was in Mongolia. What were some of the other places you've traveled to?
Should mention too that was shot by Nick DePontier, who's the showrunner of the '72 series.
Whatever happened to him?
Who?
Nick DePontier.
We gave him his start. Yeah, he's one of Canada's great documentary filmmakers. Obviously, him and his wife Jen Beshwal. For the book, I went to China, Transylvania, United Arab Emirates, and Ireland. Ireland didn't make the book. And for the movie, we couldn't get back into China. So we ended up going to Mongolia. So, all of those places, and then, and Europe, and that places in Europe as well. But those are the most interesting places I played.
In a way, to me, the takeaway from Tropic of Hockey and the Hockey Nomad, it has a connection to the Summit Series in this way, that Canada's game, you showed, has a foothold all over the world.
It does. It's and it's a small footprint, but it's a footprint, and really, sport. I think sport in general is one of the things that just, it's a thread. Sport and music. I think if you can find either of those communities in whatever town you're wandering through, you're going to make a friend, and there's going to be a place of comfort for you, and connectivity, which is kind of a new word for that. But I think you'll be able to, find a place where you're wanted. And so, and really, with those hockey towns that I went to, Transylvania, that was just a Google search. That was like, is there hockey in Transylvania? It's like, well, yes, in fact. There's one town that plays the game because they watched a Canadian newsreel, a newsreel in 1931 that showed Canadian infantrymen playing hockey, and they decided they could do it. So, yeah, so it was neat to discover those roots for sure.
Switching gears, here's a sample from your Stolen from a Hockey Card concerts.
Well, goodbye, thou Marie, Brian Trottier, the home of him. When I was young, I made a TV train.
What was the inspiration for those concerts?
That was Joel Darling. We started talking one day because I think they had BTO play in Stratford. And I said to Joel, we could really do something interesting here. And he was like, what do you got? And I was like, well, why don't we just ask a bunch of interesting musicians to write original compositions for the event? And first one was in Whitehorse, and people rise to the occasion, right? When you give them an idea for a song, and now we've been doing it for like 12 years, and it's great. Again, getting a chance to go to small town Canada and bring the show there. And out of it, over the last 12 years, it's been dozens and dozens of original music and original songs, a lot of which has made its way onto albums in the country and stuff too. So again, it's an excuse to use hockey in a creative capacity.
At your book launch for Keon and Me, you read a poem that you wrote at age 11 about Eddie Shack that got published. Now, for the audience, what you're about to hear is more Shel Silverstein than Elizabeth Barrett Browning, but take a listen.
When he's on the ice, he always tries, but carrying the puck, he really flies. Playing the man and shooting hard when on defense, he's like a guard. Flashing skates and scoring goals like a bowling ball, he always rolls. I thought that was a really clever one. Sort of a metaphor, right? Off the ice, he's Eddie Shack, so when you meet him... Exactly. Thank you very much. There we go.
What's the backstory on that?
Well, you're really getting facial hair or lack thereof through the years on this broadcast, man. yeah, I submitted. My mom told me I think I wrote that poem in class, and my mom said I should send it to the Young Sun, which was an amazing thing. The Young Sun, right? Every Sunday, it published, writing and artwork from kids. And whenever I do a reading, actually, and I talk about that happening, inevitably somebody will come up to me afterwards and tell me they're in the Young Sun. So huge moment for me, man. Getting published in the newspaper, that was massive. So I don't even think Eddie Shack certainly wasn't my favorite player. Maybe he had the name that you could rhyme the best, I guess, with other words. But yeah, that I was 11. It was a big deal.
Well, you've said that you didn't write about Keon because aside from neon, nothing rhymed.
There you go.
But yet you wrote a whole book, Keon and Me. What compelled you to write that one?
Ever since I started writing, people had always asked me to write a Leaf book, right? Being a Leaf fan. But I could never really figure out what kind of book I would want to write. And then I came into it by just memory, honestly, remembering middle school and being bullied in middle school by a kid who was a Flyers fan. And, I thought that I would write that book for, maybe as a young adult title. And I thought, well, wait a second, maybe if I kind of put the two ideas together, and again, like, creatively, I need to figure out a way for it to be interesting. So half of the book, one half of the book, they alternate chapters. One is from the perspective of myself as an 11-year-old. And that's told in the third person. And the alternate chapter is me as a, 52-year-old man, which is told in the first person. And it's a search for me to meet Dave Keon and tell him about that year and how I never fought back against my bully because Dave Keon didn't fight. And it wasn't until he fought Greg Shepard that I was, I had license to kind of to stand up to this guy. And so it's a story about all those things, but at its heart, it's a story about the Leafs, and it's a story about my relationship with the team.
In another book, The Best Game You Can Name, you skate and then write about the Morning Star hockey team. So I've got some footage online, not from a game you were in, but this is the Morning Star hockey team. So talk about the team and the book while we watch the footage.
The team's been around for 28 years. It's my best friends in the world planet. Oh, look, I thought that was almost a rare Morning Star goal. But yeah, it's
there's one.
They are good. That's one. Some rare footage. It's Saturday nights being together. And I think it really gets us through, There's me, number 17. Not doing much there, am I? This is amazing though. This is footage I think from Newfoundland when we went to compete for the Kilgallen Cup against the Republic of Doyle team.
That's right, 2011.
Yeah, that's right. We were invited. That's a good story too. We wanted to get to Newfoundland to play this tournament, but so we wanted to figure out a way we could do it. I called WestJet. And I said, what do you think about flying, this hockey team from Toronto to play the Republic of Doyle team? And actually, I was just looking for a discount on the flights. And Amanda, the woman on the other end, said, well, we're more interested in stories. And I was like, stories? I got some stories. So they flew us. And that game, we landed in St. John's. We were picked up in the Republic of Doyle bus coach. And we were driven to Portugal Cove, where we were put on a ferry and ferried over to Belle Island, where a school bus was waiting for us. And we put all of our equipment and all of our sticks and everything in the school bus. And it struggled to get up the hill, but finally did. And then we got to the arena and we played 2 games against the Doyles and their friends. And it was a trip of a lifetime. So it's not, and again, like with that same group of players, same group of guys, we've had those kind of experiences together, and it's beautiful.
Morningstar is made up all of musicians / hockey players.
Yeah, or people in that community if they don't play themselves. But yes.
Dave, you've written about, and you spoke a minute or so ago about a bully, but specifically on the ice, you've written about being both a victim and a perpetrator of rec league violence, and how hockey brings out a side of people who are otherwise pretty mild-mannered when they're not wearing skates. Talk about that, if you would.
I think kind of hockey releases ourselves from ourselves in both, good and bad ways, right? Like once those pipes start to open up, and once your consciousness starts to travel, there is a transformation. And I've written a little bit about just the act of putting equipment on, right? You become a different person. I think Dryden has argued that something is revealed. I think that's possibly true as well. But I also think something is created. And listen, when it works really well, it's an incredible release from the world that you know. When it doesn't work well, it's also a release from the world that you know, but it's an excuse to park or play out or release a lot of tension, angst, and anxiety, and that can be manifested. I mean, we're carrying weapons, right? And I think rec hockey players are also really deluded too, because when you're out there, when you're in the game and when you're moving, you're deluded that you're going, like, seeing that footage. Nobody wants to see footage of a 58-year-old guy skating down the ice, but when you're out there, you think you're fucking Bobby Orr, because you kind of are,
or Dave Schultz.
That's true, to somewhere in between.
Because you have written about releasing your inner asshole.
True. Yeah, it's true.
And by the way, yeah, it's not just the guys. I was at an event. I live in Seattle with the Kraken general manager, Ron Francis, who played for 23 years. And he was asked about the women's game, and he said, it's supposed to be no contact in the women's league, but I see plenty of contact in those games as well.
Oh, a couple of years ago, I was playing with an all female team, a team of women that I've been playing with on Thursdays, a rec skate, and they entered a league, and I was punched. I was punched by a woman in the handshake lineup. It was super intense. And for sure, it's hockey. It doesn't matter what gender you are. It has the same elements both ways, I think.
Now our last clip with you, ladies and gentlemen, a clip from what IMDb called a swirling animated trip through hockey's erotic behind-the-scenes world.
You're the one in the eye of a cyclone. You fill the air with obsession.
Aside from seeing Bidini 17 take a face off there, what did I just watch?
It's the two things that Canadians are good at: sex and hockey, Glenn. One Yellow Rabbit is the theater company in Calgary. The late Michael Green was their artistic director. We'd done some shows with them, Rio's had, over the years, and we were talking after a show, and he said, "What do you got cooking?" And I said, "Well, I'm thinking of writing book of erotic hockey stories, and he was like, that should be a play. And I was like, okay. So they optioned the book and staged the 5-hole. And we toured it across Canada. And that's a video made by Cam Christensen based on one of the songs written by the great Selena Martin, who's getting married in France next week to German Tom. And she's amazing. And it was super fun. We played to thousands of people across Canada, and people really dug it. And it was a funny play with songs, and I can't believe we pulled it off. But no pun intended, but we did.
Everything is pun intended. So, is there anything now that you've conquered music and books and film and stage plays? What haven't you done?
Well, I've been, really lucky to have, people in my orbit that keep telling me to keep going. Yeah, I think you need that. And band's been around for 42 years. It's an incredibly supportive group of humans. And, I've been working with Nick for a long time, and this series is a product of our friendship, right? I think at the end of the day, that counts for so much, right? And so we'll see. I do run an independent print newspaper with an amazing group here. So we're still growing that. We're in our 6th year. And so, print journalism is important to me. It's important to what we do. So we're going to keep pushing that rock up the hill and see where that goes. And, I'd like to keep doing more film and TV. So, that's the beautiful thing about waking up in the morning. You never really know what's going to, what you're going to find sitting on your desk and making something beautiful out of it.
Dave, when we started our conversation, you thanked me for the short introduction, and that's only because if I did an introduction that really did you justice, we wouldn't have had time to talk to you. But I was thinking in putting together my script, if we had to reduce describing Dave Bidini in one word, because you do music, the stage, the written word, the spoken word, that word is storyteller, and you do a beautiful job of it across many mediums. And I can't thank you enough for taking time away to share with us some of your journey. It has been so much fun.
It's been really fun for me, Glenn. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Dave. I hope to catch up with you down the road.
Totally.
Okay. Well, we are far from done. Our next guest never believed slow and steady wins the race. Ann Peel grew up to become a Canadian champion race walker, but before she went heel to toe on the track, Ann was a preteen attending 5, 6, and 7, games 5, 6, and 7 of the Summit Series. Hi, Ann.
Hey, hi. My partner put these here because he is a David Bidini fan. Just so that's my set.
Hey, you know what? I think Dave is now putting up his Ann Peel photos. So.
Okay. Good. So mutual. And there's several issues of the West End Phoenix, Dave's paper over on the coffee table.
Excellent.
In the East End.
He'll be delighted to know that. First of all, thank you for your patience.
No problem. I'm happy to be here. It's interesting.
What were you doing in Moscow, and how did you end up at the Luzhniki Ice Palace?
Well, unlike, I guess it was Ken Dryden saying that Canadians didn't go to Europe or behind the Iron Curtain, I lived behind the Iron Curtain for the first 13 years of my life. So we were posted in September of 72, probably got there in August, actually, in time for school to start in September. My father was stationed with the Canadian Embassy in Moscow until 1974. And before that, we'd been in Prague, and before that in Madrid, Spain. And my brother was actually born in Ankara, Turkey. I was born in Ottawa, but we left 3 weeks after I was born for Turkey. So I lived a very nomadic, peripatetic life.
That's your brother in the picture with you?
That's my brother in the picture. Yeah.
Okay. We have proof, by the way, that 11-year-old Anne was at Game 5. Believe it or not, she did an intermission interview that aired all across Canada with Bill Good. And here it is.
People will go to no end of trouble to see a hockey game, and I think we've got some people here who've traveled all the way across the ocean. Where are you from?
I'm from Halifax, Nova Scotia.
How did you get to Moscow? When did you decide that you'd make the trip?
I came on a charter trip, Air Canada, on the 19th. I'm here for 2 weeks, and decided one morning, heard it on the radio, that there was a tour coming over.
Hi, what's your name?
NPO.
Now, you've got Moscow and Maple Leafs written across there.
That's the Canadian Embassy hockey team.
Do you live here in Moscow?
Yes.
You're pulling for Canada tonight, though, eh?
Oh, yes.
I heard you making a lot of noise up in the stands.
It's just because I'm happy.
Does your dad work here in Moscow?
Yes, he's in the Canadian Embassy.
I see. Okay, how long have you lived in Moscow?
For 3 weeks.
You've just come over here?
Yes.
Some of these people have lived here almost as long, but I guess you'll be staying a little longer, eh?
Yes, I'll be staying for 2 years.
For goodness sakes, so you're looking forward to it?
Not really.
Are you going to learn to speak Russian?
I hope so.
Okay, thank you, dear, and enjoy the hockey games. Okay, well, I hope you all enjoy your stay in Moscow and get a chance to see quite a few things.
And what kind of memories come flooding back when you see that?
Well, it's interesting because the first time I saw that was when Paul sent me the clip, or Sean. And so it's really neat because it had been a memory my whole life that this had happened, but I'd never seen it. And so it was really quite neat. And then, of course, yeah, what comes back is the game and all of us always yelling, da, da, Canada, niet, Soviet, waving our flags and just being, really, really keen on the Canadian team, obviously, because when you grow up in the diplomatic service, you don't live in Canada, but you're representing Canada, and being a Canadian patriot is kind of a prerequisite for the job. So, and your whole family is the job. My father was stationed in the embassy, but the whole family does the job of representing Canada. So it was, a really important extension of our being there to watch these games.
Well, I'll tell you my reactions to the interview. Number one, if some shampoo company didn't sign you up after this interview, I mean, look at you. Even Goldilocks would be jealous. But more to the point, you showed remarkable poise in your on-camera debut.
We were a diplomatic family. That's how I was raised. I was raised to be very aware of the fact that we represented Canada and Canadians, and in the diplomatic corps. I mean, I would go to parties where I met Prime Minister Trudeau, the first one, Pierre, in 1968 in Prague on Canada Day. I met the King Juan Carlos of Spain. I mean, this was our gang. So you learned poise. You were surrounded by poise, and it was shockingly important. So,
well, you certainly showed it, but as far as diplomacy goes, looking forward to your years in Moscow?
No,
not really. Your dad must not have explained everything about diplomacy to you as an 11-year-old.
Well, 11-year-olds are honest.
That's not the same as diplomatic.
Oh, no, we really didn't like it there very much. It was a tough place to be. I remember our apartment was on Kutuzovsky Prospect, which is where Brezhnev lived down the street. And in the apartment blocks, the Soviets didn't allow anybody but like foreigners were in our own apartment buildings. And I remember we were on the 7th floor of this building, and our living area was in one apartment, and then you had to go way down the hall to get to the bedrooms. And it was just there were a lot of restrictions that I was aware of even as a child. A militiaman, we called them Millie men, would check us in and out of the building. Our dog died one evening. My father took the dog out to take it to the vet. And when he came back in, he was grilled by the militiaman because he didn't have the dog. So it was not an easy place to be. I mean, the Russians that we met, we weren't allowed to make friends with Russians. But of course, you would meet Russians and meet Russian kids, and they were all terrific. But the system was really oppressive, so it was not a happy place to be. Put it that way.
I would guess that you have an appreciation for home, for Canada, that maybe most people don't, who haven't had the experiences you've had.
Oh, I think so. Yeah. And over the years, I've talked with people. Canadians take a lot of stuff for granted. And particularly our democratic systems and structures for granted, and having experienced other systems, I continue to appreciate living in Canada. I still really wouldn't want to go back to living anywhere else.
Before we completely leave the 11-year-old you, this is a cover of Ken Dryden's new book on the Summit series. It uses a photo of Canadian fans in Moscow, and darned if that isn't Ann Peel cheering down there in the corner. When did you get made aware of this?
When I went to Book City to get a copy for my father-in-law.
When you went to get the copy, were you aware you were on the cover, or did you just want to get the book?
Nope, I didn't even actually see it. My partner said, "That's you." That picture keeps popping up everywhere. It's I don't know, maybe somebody took it who gave up the rights, or I guess it's more than 25 years, so they wouldn't have copyright anymore anyway. But that picture does just keep popping up. There weren't a lot of kids, right, at these games. So I suspect that's why that picture got taken, partly because, oh, there's a kid.
In fact, is it true that you were at the game and your parents weren't?
No, I think my parents were there. I'm pretty sure my parents were there. They just
weren't with you for the interview.
No, because in those days, as I'm sure you remember, your parents just were like, "Okay, make sure you're in by dark." I do remember somebody coming along and tapping me on the shoulder and asking me if I would be willing to be interviewed. And so, of course, right, be on TV. I'm 11. But nobody came with me. I just went with this guy and did a television interview, which nobody, I'm sure, would allow their children to do now. But it was a different time.
Well, my parents would ask me to go back for the picnic basket at the park, and when I turned around, they would have driven off. But we really don't have time to get into that. I want to ask you instead more generally about the Canadian fans in Moscow. They did provide an enormous psychological lift to Team Canada down on the ice. Mm-hmm. What do you remember about being in the stands and the feeling of kind of contributing to the effort?
I don't remember a lot. I remember a lot of noise. I remember a lot of excitement and flags, and you could barely see the hockey game for all of the Canadian flags that were waving. But I do remember we were really anxious because we had just assumed that the Canadians would win all of the 4 games in Canada and just like tromp all over the Soviet team. So I do remember, we really wanted to use our energy to propel them to wins. I remember wanting that as a little girl. I couldn't imagine them not winning. I actually really couldn't imagine them not winning the series. So it's a darn good thing they did, or they would have destroyed my imagination. That's for sure.
They would have crushed little 11-year-old Anne.
Crush me, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Game 8, you watch at your residence. Do you remember what you did after Team Canada's victory?
Yeah, Game 8's a funny story because we were watching it, and my brother and I were on our bunk beds, and we saw Paul hit the puck, like take the shot, and then that was it. The television went black. So we don't know if that was deliberate or if it was just an infrastructure failure. There were an awful lot of infrastructure failures in Moscow. All the time. Electricity would go out, hot water would be not hot, just all sorts of stuff. And so we had to wait for my parents to come home to learn that Canada had actually won. We were very anxious. We were very worried about it. We stayed up waiting for them to come home, and they took a long time to come home because obviously after Canada won, they would have been a big part of the celebrations, and I'm, probably getting together with people in the lobby and the rest of it. So I remember it took a while, and we really wanted to know whether we'd won or not. So
And I read that afterward you did go out of the residence to celebrate, and that the Russian people you encountered were actually pretty good natured about it.
Oh, the Russians were great. Yeah, they didn't hold a grudge against us at all. No, it was the Cold War is really complex. But most people, we lived in Eastern Europe half of my life. No people we encountered wished us ill, and we didn't wish them ill. People would just go on living, despite how their governments are feeling about each other. So the Russian people were always, in my experience, very warm and open and hospitable, except when we were roller skating through their stores, in which case they would yell "Nilzya" at us, which means it's forbidden. But I don't blame them. Roller skating through a store is not a cool thing to do, but hey, I was a kid.
Now, you didn't just watch hockey in Moscow. You played hockey in Moscow, right?
No, I don't think I did. The Moscow Maple Leafs were the adults.
Just the adults.
I don't remember getting to play as a kid. We did do a lot of skating in Moscow. Gorky Park, they would flood all of the paths in the park and turn them into ice. So we did a lot of skating, and I probably played some pickup hockey, but the Moscow Maple Leafs were definitely just the adults.
You just got to wear the T-shirt.
Right. Oh yeah, of course. We all got the T-shirt. Yeah.
But you didn't drink the beer.
Pardon?
You didn't drink the beer.
No, I wouldn't have drunk the beer.
Or did you?
I don't think in Moscow people drank beer. It was vodka all the way.
Well, I've seen pictures of the Moscow Maple Leafs, and in 2 different pictures, they have a case of beer.
Oh, probably. Yes. Well, beer was a big Canadian thing, so maybe they brought the beer. But people in Moscow drank 2 things. They drank kvass, which is this weird drink. I don't remember, non-alcoholic. Yeah. And they drank vodka. Lots and lots and lots of Stolichnaya vodka.
Well, I have heard that some of the older than you Canadian fans mixed vodka and champagne.
Oh, probably. Yeah. And in those days, you also ate beluga caviar by the 5-kilo container tin can. So, oh yeah, it was pretty fine living.
Fish that will never grow up to be fish.
That's right. That's right.
From what I've read about the sport of race walking, half the battle.
The sport, just to be clear, the sport is athletics, track and field, and race walking's an event. So kind of like the hammer throw or the marathon or whatever. It's an event.
Well, obviously I didn't read enough about it.
Yeah, obviously.
But what I did read is that at least half the battle is ignoring how much pain you're in. And when I'm in pain, all I care about is making the pain stop. So why didn't you follow that course?
I don't remember pain. Who said that? You remember the pain you're in?
Well, you said you remembered the pain when you didn't win.
Oh yeah, but that's humiliation, not physical pain.
Well, you also talked about training.
Oh yeah, training's
and how you wanted to stop and how much it hurt. Apparently, you've blocked all that out.
I guess I have. Well, I did retire 30 years ago, so I've forgotten about it. But no, I don't remember races being. I mean, they're hard work, obviously. And
Here's what you said. You said the first half of a long race was, getting out to a lead, and that was fine. But the second half was mostly mental.
Oh, I think the whole thing, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I do think the difference between any given athlete on the day is a psychological difference for sure. And it's not about wanting to win. Everybody wants to win, but it's about being mentally equipped to do your best in that race for sure. Because everybody's fit. Like when you're competing at the international level, absolutely everybody's fit. Top fitness, extraordinary fitness. And so the difference on the day really is like who's best equipped to put up with whatever the circumstances throw at you in that particular race.
In a newspaper article, you once explained how your time in Moscow helped you competitively. You said, quote, "The Soviets don't spook me as they do a lot of athletes. I've seen them as normal people. My perception is not that the Soviets are some kind of athletic machines. It's easier to race them when you think of them as humans," unquote.
Yep. Everybody thought that the Eastern Bloc athletes were machines. The East Germans, the Russians, and then when the Chinese came on the scene too. And because I'd lived among them, I didn't have that attitude. And then I was also really lucky because I've always spoken a few words of Russian and I could talk with them. So that further humanized us to each other.
You could also understand what they were saying.
Probably not well enough, no.
Okay.
But
all right. So these days, do you still walk fast or do you stroll?
Apparently I walk fast. I don't race walk anymore because that's a very technical approach to walking, but apparently I still walk very fast.
All right, one more race walking question. And that is, I've also read that sometimes there's shenanigans, like people will pull on you maybe before the start, or one racer will intentionally elbow another.
Oh yeah. Well, you guys were all talking about the aggressiveness of hockey, right? I think it's just really the aggressiveness of sport. When you're racing, you bring everything you've got to it. And absolutely, I remember at the Worlds in Rome in '87 when I guess I was identified as a threat, and I got surrounded actually by the Russian athletes, and they were like holding me in and kind of elbowing me in the gut and the rest of it. You just get yourself out of the situation. But yeah, of course, I mean it's aggressive, right? Everybody wants to win. If you didn't want to win, you wouldn't be competing at that level. You're very goal oriented.
So if you're not cheating, you're not trying.
Well, it's not cheating. It's not cheating. It's just bringing everything you've got to it. The race walking is actually very specific. There are 2 technical rules that you have to follow, and there are judges on the course making sure that you do follow those rules. So people are watching closely. No, it's just part of the jostle of being in a race, right? You're surrounded by people. Some people throw a few elbows. It's really not a big deal.
Okay. So, Anne, I want to close with a portion of a beautiful letter you penned to the Toronto Globe and Mail. This was about a decade ago.
Okay.
Yes, we've done our homework here. Quote, "The Summit Series taught me that even if states can't get along, people can. The experience shared with Russia's people showed us we always have common ground that makes life richer for all. And that is the beauty of sport." So I guess you did learn diplomacy after all, Anne.
I did. I guess I did. But also sport. Yeah, that's just where my blood is. Right. I think sport is magic. And I do think sport brings people together. It's kind of ironic sometimes because it's the competition that actually brings people together with that sense of common purpose, even if they're on opposing sides. So, yep. Sport, that's it.
Has it been fun being part of the 50th anniversary celebrations?
Yes, it has been. It surprised me. I was really not even all that aware of course, no kidding, right? 2022, 1972, it's 50 years. But it isn't kind of part of my everyday life. But yeah, it has been really fun, and it's been neat to watch people celebrate it and remember it. And that's a really great thing when we have those shared memories.
And we can't thank you enough for sharing some of those memories for us, hanging around till we could get to you. But this has been just a real pleasure and a delight. And thank you for bringing us both into the event of race walking and the Summit Series in '72. It was just a real pleasure for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for including me. Pleasure to meet you. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye-bye. We are not done. We still have a couple of people to bring on. And the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to bring back two of the three amigos. That's Sean Mitten and Alex Braverman, who, along with Paul Patskou, wrote this book, When Canada Shut Down. The country you're trying to reach is watching hockey. It may be a book, but that doesn't mean I can read. Sean and Alex, welcome. Tell me, is it more fun writing a book or having the damn thing finished?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I would say, first of all, it's fun to talk to people like Anne because there's such great stories. And like Dave Bidini said at the beginning, he's a storyteller. Collecting these stories is a lot of fun. But at the same time, it is a ton of work and you have deadlines. And so we feel very good that the book has been completed. But yeah, a bit of both.
How about for you, Alex? You're muted.
He's speechless.
I'm sorry. It was an interesting journey, and I'm glad we did it together with Sean and Paul. And hopefully, people will read the book. And I would like to hear what they say about the book. But I believe it's a good one. And just let us know.
We're going to talk to you for a few more minutes about the book and also hear from an event where Paul Henderson spoke and another event in Moscow where the Team Russia players spoke. But the next person I want to introduce and have speak is the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Team Canada members were honored at the Capitol in Ottawa, and here is Justin Trudeau.
They weren't only heroes because they had won the series. They were all heroes because they taught us a lesson. They showed us how grit and hard work pays off. They showed us that even when there's only 34 seconds left to play, you never give up. And in a global example, they showed us that having a hard-fought competition on ice can go a long way, even for diplomacy. Mr. Speaker, Paul Henderson once told the story of a friend calling him when the Berlin Wall fell, saying that after his famous goal in '72, the Soviets probably never recovered. Now, I will let experts debate on whether there's any truth to that, but what is absolutely true is that the Summit Series was a defining moment in the history of our country. Hear, hear.
I won't try to follow the Prime Minister. Well, actually, I am, aren't I? But you didn't have the Prime Minister at your function, Sean, but tell me about the alumni lunch you did organize.
Yeah, you know what was interesting? It was probably about a week to 10 days before. Paul Patskow and I met with Paul Henderson at his house, and that day his grandson was there as well, Alton, who's been a great part of the book. He's been a great advisor, and so we were telling Paul about this great NHL alumni luncheon, and he said, "Well, why don't I come? I'll kind of pop in." And Paul and I would, we were thrilled as like the opportunity for Paul to be a part of that, and in fact, we had to keep it a secret for a couple of weeks because. One, we wanted to make sure that he was going to be there, but two, the plan was he was going to come probably halfway through, and we were going to say, guys, we got a special guest here. And so, but the funny thing was, Paul was so excited to be a part of that event. He was actually there, 30 minutes before everybody else was. So he had a wonderful time, and I think one of the hidden gems of that whole event was there was about 11 Canadians who were in Moscow for that. And during those proceedings, Paul took a picture with those 11 people, and it's just a wonderful mini reunion of them getting together. And that was a special time and period.
What we're going to do right now, guys, is share a few minutes from that event, the wit and wisdom of Paul Henderson sitting between Paul Patskow and Sean Mitten. So hang on.
We knew we had to get in better shape than we were. Anytime you underestimate opposition, you're in trouble. And we weren't ready for them to start with. So we went but one of the reasons we went to Sweden is to get used to the bigger ice surface that we were playing on, and which was right up my alley. My two assets were my speed and my shot. I could score goals. And so I went with a lot of anticipation. Felt good. But it's amazing. One little thing sometimes makes the difference. We're at the first practice in Moscow. We're skating around, and John Ferguson, who is the assistant coach, come up to me and he says, Paul, he said, if we're going to beat these guys, we're really counting on your line, and we're really counting on you to score some goals because you can skate and we need you. And I don't care how good a hockey player you are. Everybody needs encouragement every once in a while, don't you? And I remember that, and I remember we had a reunion a few years later, and I said, before he died, unfortunately he died a few years ago, but I said, John, you'll never know how much that meant to me. And everybody needs confidence, and so thank you, John Ferguson. Well, I beat a guy on the outside, but then he cut my feet out from underneath me, and I was going so fast I went into the boards backwards. And you can see the replay. Back of my head hit those walls like that, and I was. But the funny part about this, my wife was petrified over there, and I go down, and I gotta tell you, you back this up now. I married the greatest woman in the world. I had a choice of all the women in the world. I've never made a better choice. I'm down in the ice, and she said, get up, do something. I am not staying in that hotel room by myself. Get up. Oh, man. But anyway, yeah, I didn't know what happened for a while. And then they got me in there, and they told me I couldn't play. And so Harry come in, the coach sent in and said, you've got to take your equipment off. And so I said, Harry, don't do this to me. Please let me play. And he looked at me and his exact words, Henny, we sure as hell need you. And if you want to play, I'm not going to stop you. But that's why I'm an idiot today. See, well, back then, you didn't want, you did anything to stay in the lineup. Because if somebody got into your lineup and did a good job, you might be in trouble. So it was just the culture of that time. And you didn't want to, like there was that ego thing there, you're a man, and you didn't want to be a wuss or anything like that. So a lot of times, every one of us played in games we should never have played. But now that's changed, because you go in there and the doctors look at you and they point your finger at you, and there's no argument. I went to camp the next year, and I hated it. When you're not used to it, it was hot and everything like that. And so anyway, I had no intention of putting it back on because I got really bad. Actually, Doug Barkley, our defenseman, hit me. We were on a power play and he hit me right here with a slap shot. And I was out cold. I was 3 days in the hospital. And that was a definite concussion. But anyway, CCM came along that summer and offered me an endorsement deal if I would wear their helmet. And so when they told me what they were going to pay me, holy crap. And my wife was been on me. She wanted me to keep it on, and I said, "Gosh." So anyway, I go to training camp, and we made a great deal. And anyway, we go to training camp, and Sid Abel, the coach, came to me and says, "Paul, we don't want our players wearing a helmet." And that's how the culture was. And so I said, "Well, Sid, this is where they come along this summer, and this is what they're going to pay me." And you know what he said? "Bullshit," they did. And so he said, and so I had to get the contract and show him. And so I said, "Here's the deal. If you think I'm pulling up, not playing well, I'll take the helmet on. But if I'm playing half decent or playing well, I think I should be able to do that." And he said, "Okay, that's a deal." Well, about 5 games later, the New York Rangers came in and we beat them 5-3. I got 4 goals and an assist. And he come back and he says, "I got no problem with you." True story. True story. You know what I worry about? If they ever put me in the Hall of Fame, everybody will forget me. I'm not allowed to that all the time, change the name of the bloody thing. Hall of Fame, you're more famous than anything. Like, no, don't do that. And I tell you, and this is the truth. There's a lot of players that are not in the Hall of Fame that have better careers than I am. And it doesn't bother me one iota that I'm not in the Hall of Fame. I've got every other award in the whole confounded world. But that is the truth. They put me in, nobody's going to be upset anymore. Forget it. Leave me out. Our line was out in the ice. Bobby Clark, Ronnie Ellis, and myself. And we were the only line that stayed together for all 8 games. But we came off the ice with about a minute and a half left in the game. And he sent out Esposito, Cornway, and Peter Mahovlich. And then he came down to us and said, "If there's any time left, you're up." You know, we were 3 lines, and we had Hall of Famers that he passed over and came down to us. And so I often thought about that. So anyway, we know we're up. Well, the Russians had told us if the game ended up in a tie, they were going to claim victory because at this point they had scored 1 more goal. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, just like that, I stood up. I got to get on the ice. We got to win this game. And I started yelling at Peter Mahovlich, the left winger. And Frank was sitting beside me and thought, "What the hell are you doing?" And I said, "Peter!" Anyway, I called Peter off, and I jumped over the boards. Never did that before. Never did it again in my life, call a guy off the ice. But you imagine if I call him off, and the Russians go down, and we lose that series? See, I'd be talking to a group in Siberia. You know? So there's definitely risk reward. After I scored the goal, we came back to the bench, and you know, the guys went crazy and everything. And Harry said, "You guys finish it off." And I looked at him and I said, "Harry, I am done. I am done. Put somebody else up." And I just knew I would have been petrified to play the last 34 seconds. Like I was emotionally, physically, mentally done. And he looked at me like I said, "I am not kidding. Get somebody." I went and just sat on that bench and, "Oh, man, does this feel good?"
Sean, what was it like getting to rub shoulders during the book writing process with Paul Henderson and some of the other important Summit Series figures?
I guess the first word would be honored. You know, just honored to be telling the stories. I think there was also a responsibility. You know, every day, you know, I wanted to come with Alex and Paul and work hard to put a book that they would also be proud of. So, there was a lot of importance in my mind. And the other thing is, this is probably the last go around for the 50th. So we want to make sure that we did a good job and gave some different perspectives. And, also made sure that these stories were passed on to the younger generation and have people like Alton McDermott involved. So I think we accomplished that, but it was definitely, it was a treat to get these stories from Paul. And, one other I'll share with you, Glenn, was, I was showing Paul the video of his interview with Pat Marsden right after the game with him and Brad Park. And so it was pretty cool. And Paul was there as well, to watch his face and his expression as he's watching this. But one thing he had said was 5 years after the goal, every time that he would see the video of him scoring that goal, he would still get goosebumps. And, I think that kind of sticks with me as well, that there was just so much emotion in this series for him, for the players, for the fans. That level of emotion will never be equated.
A 50th anniversary celebration was also held in Moscow. And thanks to Max Petrov, who's the son of Russian Summit Series player Vladimir Petrov, we can show you video and interviews from that gala. And Alex, as we do that, narrate what we're watching.
Yeah, you can see the video of Paul Henderson saying good words to Russian players. We last year when we interviewed Tretiak and Mikhailov and Yakushev, we were talking about upcoming anniversary, and we're hoping we can celebrate together the Canadian players and the Soviet players. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but this was our way to contribute to and try to put them together. And you can see Paul Henderson talking about it. And in next video, you will see Tretiak reflected on that episode also. So here's Tretiak is explaining the previous episode and saying good words to Canadian players. Unfortunately, it was in Russian and we didn't translate it yet, but you can see him talking. And in the room, it was remaining players of the Soviet team, plus it was children and wives. One of the table was a wife of Babrov, the coach Vsevolod Babrov. Max Petrov was there as a son, and here you see the remaining players in anniversary jerseys.
Alex, why do you think that the Russian players have so embraced the Summit Series?
As previous guest told us, and she mentioned, the sports, even they compete on a track or on a arena on the ice. After that, they become friends, and that's what happened in the series. They all become friends. They all wish each other all the best, and they talk about this all the time. And the system is one thing, but people, it's a different things, like Anne said also. And we're all the same. We want the same things to happen to our family, to our kids and grandchildren, and hopefully we'll still have time to get together and celebrate at one point.
And we do have, with subtitles at the bottom, a couple of the Soviet superstars talking at the event. So I'm going to share that video right now.
Я всегда был человек с юмором, но когда я на площадке, юмор я оставляла в раздевалке. Поэтому я старался и стараюсь не меняться. Поэтому... Но мне понравилось, что хоть с юмором меня канадцы помнят. Это под эгидой Федерации хоккея России. Большое внимание уделяют Федерации пропаганды и вообще нашему хоккею. И тем более отмечают такие даты, как суперсерия «Товарищеский игр» 1972 года. Она ну как бы до сих пор о ней помнят, о ней знают, они очень много говорят, и правильно, потому что это впервые в истории мирового хоккея встречались канадские профессионалы и любители из Европы. Только после этих игр стали НХЛ, как она, коммерческая закрытая лига, она обратила внимание на Европу и стала приглашать лучших игроков в НХЛ. И тем самым стала намного быстрее развиваться, чем бы она развивалась и варилась в своей кухне между канадцами и американцами.
Во-первых, я играл за команду, значит, ЦСКА, в которой 15 человек играли за сборную. Практически это второй состав. Был не очень сильный, но Всеволод Михайлович Бобров сказал, что тебе предстоит, значит, играть против канадцев, и много работы будет, да давай поиграй за команду ЦСКА, ослабленную команду ЦСКА. Вот. Но я сказал, что может мне не надо играть, у меня завтра свадьба, поэтому я думал все время о завтрашнем дне, кто меня отпустит или как это все пройдет. И, конечно, а для вратаря очень важно вот концентрация внимания. Оно это не было, и видно, 8 шайб мне забили, и канадцы сказали, что это самое слабое звено вот, в команде сборной Советского Союза.
То есть просто не вовремя они приехали смотреть.
Не вовремя приехали, но это, я думаю, хорошо сыграло на нашу мельницу.
Но это не такой не хитрый план.
Нет, это не хитрый. Нет,
так
сложилось. Да.
Да.
Важность то, что она открыла окно в Северную Америку, потому что мы представляли не только олимпийских чемпионов мира, которым мы являлись, мы представляли всю Европу, весь любительский хоккей, который не признавался в Северной Америке. И мы как бы прорубили окно, как Петр I в Европу, так мы прорубили окно в Северную Америку. После нас хоккей изменился, после суперсерии 72 появилась суперсерия 74, Кубка Канады, несколько раз наши команды ЦСКА, Крыльцовец, Спартак, Динамо стали участвовать в разных товарищеских матчах против НХЛских клубов. Поэтому, конечно, игры 1972 года внесли большой вклад в развитие вообще мирового хоккея.
It's interesting, Alex. There's a lot of Canadians who aren't nearly as popular as Vladislav Tretiak is in Canada. He's really beloved over here in North America these days.
Yes, his first question he was answering referred to the days when Toronto's Leaf Scouts came to Moscow before the series, and they look at the game, which he referred to as CSKA and national team. And it was the day before his wedding, so he didn't play well. He let 8 goals in. And that's when Canadian scouters told coaches, you know, the weakest link in the Russian team is a goalie. And, you know, this series is going to be easy for you. You're going to win all 8 games because he can't catch anything. And then he surprised everybody in Montreal. And, you know, we know what happened in the first game.
And these are the rings, the 50th anniversary rings that the Russian Team Canada, Team Russia players rather, were given. And if you don't think they were important, there's Vladislav kissing his ring. Do you know anything else about the event that was held in Moscow, where it was held and so on, Alex?
Yeah, this one was held in the Museum of Hockey in Moscow. And it was like more like a dinner type event and presentation. Obviously, they show this is Bobrov's wife right here. You see the picture of Seva Bobrov on the left, and his wife received the ring for him. Guy on the right side of Tretiak is Roman Rotenberg, who is vice president of the Russian Federation.
Okay, thank you for being our tour guide to the Moscow end of the celebrations. Sean, let's close by having you tell us where people can find the book.
Sure. Before I do so, I just want to point out one more thing. You know, tremendous job by Alex to get those photos, get the video, the relationships he made with the former Soviet national team. Just incredible with the time zones and the technology. And a lot of the things that we brought together with, you know, even the stories with the person we call affectionately the Russian stick boy, Alexei Kochekov. I mean, a lot of these were, courtesy of Alex Braverman. So we were very fortunate to have him as an important part of our team. And to answer your question, Glenn, they can get it at they go online to lulu.com. They make great Christmas gifts. And we'll also be at the in November. We're going to be in Toronto at the Sports Card Expo. I believe it's going to be November 11th to the 13th. And the final thing to make note of, and Paul's mentioned this before, is we're also going to be part of the DVD box set. So if everybody's following along with the CBC series, our book is going to be a digital component of that when it comes out in sometime around mid-November. So we're really excited and honored to be a part of that as well.
That's the last. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, if I may just add something. Today, 50 years ago, Pierre Elliott Trudeau wrote the telegram to Mr. Kosygin, who was the Prime Minister of Soviet Union at that time. And if you mind, I will read the telegram for you. It says, "Historic and exciting hockey series just concluded. Will long be remembered. This great event has not only brought the team together, but millions of people in Canada and USSR. I can congratulate the Soviet players for their skill and stamina, which have won our admiration. Canadians hope that we will have many opportunities to watch them play again." Pierre Elliott Trudeau. And what it says about the Trudeau, and the Kosygin wrote the telegram back to him. Even in the in time of Cold War, in time of differences, the smart leaders could get the countries together, and people and hockey players can get the country together. That's what we for, hockey diplomacy. Let's just meet on ice and be friends.
And you can find that story in the book as well.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Sean. Our thanks also to Dave Bidini and Ann Peel, and to you for watching. We'll see you next time on Hockey Time Machine.
Thank you. Goodbye, everybody.